We're starting, so she's live streaming us. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Subcommittee on Higher Education, which is a subcommittee of the Committee on Finance and Appropriations. Welcome to the first meeting of the subcommittee, and thank you for attending this meeting as we finish the first week of the 2022 session. Before we begin, I want to note that this meeting and all of our subcommittee meetings this session will be streaming on the Senate website. Staff have also posted all presentations materials to the website for download. We have 3 presentations this afternoon. It is my intention to finish around 4:30, at least that was the intention. So do not hesitate to ask questions as our discussions move on. First, we will hear from Dr. Makola Abdullah, President of Virginia State University and Chair of the Council of Presidents. He will be followed by Peter Blake, Executive Director of the State Council of Higher Education for Virginia, and Wendy Kong, CHEV's Director of Innovation and Finance Policy, who will give us an update on the ongoing higher education cost study. Finally, Jessica will provide an overview of the proposed actions in higher education. So, first we will hear from Dr. Abdullah. And please speak directly into the mics since we're live streaming.
Madam Chair, good afternoon. And good afternoon to all of the senators who are here. I am, of course, Makola Abdullah, as you introduced me, and I'm proud to be the 14th president of Virginia State University, the 4th oldest public institution here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and of course our HBCU. I'm very excited to be the president of Virginia State, to be a part of an institution that has done so much for so many. I'm also, in this role, the chair of the Council of Presidents, which consists of 16 public colleges and universities, as well as 23 community colleges and 1 two-year institution. We are proud that we believe we have the best higher ed group of institutions in the country, and we're proud of what we do here in Virginia with our very diverse and also very good institutions. Consistent with the recommendations of the State Council of Higher Education in Virginia and the Virginia Business and Higher Ed Council, we appreciate the proposed additional investments in higher education. We strongly support additional funds that will help keep college affordable, including general operating funds, as well as undergraduate and graduate financial aid and other programs targeted for affordable access. We are greatly appreciative for funds that help to support information technology costs, rising costs in non-personnel services, costs for enrollment growth, operations, and maintenance of new buildings. We would also use additional funds to expand existing programs and create new ones to meet talent needs in high-demand fields. We as a Council of Presidents also appreciate and support continuing to focus on supporting higher ed institutions that provide access to larger percentages of students who qualify for federal Pell Grants. This includes our HBCUs, our community colleges, and our two-year college, as well as other institutions that extensively serve underrepresented students. In addition to what we've presented thus far, we have 2 main priorities this session that both have budget amendments. The first is additional support for state employee salaries, which continues to be a critical need at our institutions. In the introduced budget, funding for salary increases provides about 1/2 of the funding needed for a full 5% increase. Institutions would need to make up the other half with institutional funds. In many cases, the additional funds would have to come from tuition increases. In order to mitigate the impact on tuition increases, we ask that the General Assembly provide additional general fund support to help meet the institutional share of the salary increases. For our second priority, we hope that the General Assembly will consider a unified recommendation from the Council to enhance internship opportunities in the Commonwealth of Virginia. We want to see every student enrolled in a degree program at a Virginia public institution of higher education have the opportunity to graduate with a paid, employment-based applied learning experience that is integrated into their degree program so as not to extend the time to degree. This is why we support Senator Locke's budget amendment to increase funding to facilitate the business education collaboration in scaling up internships and other work-based learning opportunities for Virginia students with Virginia-based employers. We are particularly excited about that second priority. During the time of COVID-19, one of the benefits is that the Council of Presidents, at that time led by Donna Henry and then Mike Rao and now myself, have grown closer together and have begun to think about not just how we work together to mitigate the challenges that we face, but how do we work together to establish new strategic initiatives that can advance higher education across the Commonwealth of Virginia. This proposal for internships is our first foray into looking at how do we have something that impacts all of our institutions, impacts all of the students in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and improves our ability for our young people to have access to jobs and internships. And so we're really excited about that. And with that, Madam Chair, I have concluded my remarks.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? You must have done a marvelous job.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you so very much. We appreciate it and appreciate your work with the Council of Presidents.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right, Peter, you're up.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee. I'm Peter Blake from SHEV, and it's my pleasure to be with you today. And I know primarily you want to hear about the funding and cost study, or the cost and funding study that you put into language and provided some funding for last year. So I'll be very brief. I wanted to follow up on President Abdullah's remarks and just commend him for his work with his colleagues and the presidents. As you know, they're not an easy bunch to get around and bring together in any way, but McCullough has done an excellent job, and he's a real resource for you for what they're thinking about. So hats off to McCullough Abdullah. Just wanted to give you a little bit of context about what Wendy Kong is going to talk about in the cost and funding study. This was something that you directed legislatively last session. We've hit the ground running. We're working hard on it. We got some good team working on it. We think ultimately it could lead to a fairer, more equitable, and efficient use of limited state taxpayer dollars. And so we appreciate your support for that. Just a little bit of context also about our budget recommendations. President Abdullah mentioned need-based financial aid and operating funds, which have the benefit of mitigating large tuition increases. Those two go hand in hand, and we appreciate your support for those. And you'll see a couple of others and things that we have sent over to you already. But the real foundation of what we've done is in what we call the Virginia Plan for Higher Education, which is this year, it's the statewide strategic plan. We call it this year the Pathways to Opportunity Plan. You have a brochure before you that many of you have looked through already that talks about the three broad goals about making Virginia higher education more equitable, more affordable, and transformative. And then we have a number of strategies and measures related to those three broad goals. The ultimate goal is to make Virginia the best state for education. We believe that if we can have 70% of our adult age population with some sort of post-secondary education, a workforce credential, an associate degree, a bachelor's degree, that we'll be positioned to be the best state for education, which of course is highly correlated with being the best state for business and the best state to raise a child and a whole bunch of other rankings with which you're familiar. So that's the foundation. That's our North Star. We as a coordinating board, of course, don't have governing authority over our institutions, but all of them are moving towards the big goal, although they do it in their own different ways, as our decentralized system allows. So that is the foundation for what we're talking about, and I'd be happy to take any questions or turn it over to Wendy directly.
Well, good afternoon. And Peter mentioned a little bit of why we're doing this study, so I'll just briefly talk a little bit about what we're doing now and what you can expect next. In terms of why we're doing this study, Peter gave that context, but I'd like to probably try to think of some things that you might have that's brought to you that we're hoping to answer through this study. The question sometimes is a certain institution receiving an adequate amount of money? Is it one underfunded versus another? And those are difficult questions because each institution is serving students differently. They offer different types of services. So part of the reason that we really wanted to look at this and think, to help you with questions that you have. Are we adequately funding higher education? Is doing this study. Some other things that we had listed was, we had last looked at this about 20 years ago, so it was a good time to do it. And as Peter mentioned, this is part of a legislative mandate, that budget language that was added, and want to thank you for adding this in, because this is a very important project that we want to be working on moving forward. I'll just note we have 4 key deliverables with this project. And really, in order to get to a funding formula, we want to learn from others. So the first one is to really look at, what are the national models? What are other states doing? And how can we learn from that? And second, one of the questions we often hear is, are the institutions efficient? If we're going to give money to institutions, are they using it currently wisely and effectively and efficiently for students? So we have a couple of things that we'll talk about in a minute about what we're looking at with that. And then from there, we wanted to look at some cost trends to better understand things and to develop some benchmarks, look at what do other institutions look like, publicly funded institutions in other states look like compared to what Virginia is doing. And I'll share some of the outcomes that we had from our interim report on that. And then finally, taking all of those things together, that helps us think about a model, knowing what other states are doing, knowing how efficient and effective we are, and then thinking about whether the costs are reasonable when we want to fund things. To help us when we're thinking about limited public resource dollars, how do we put them in the right place? And we're going to have to do the tricky part of balancing that with costs for students, costs for the state, costs to institutions, and then balancing that with quality, balancing that with affordability and equity. So not an easy task, but we're excited to be working on it, and we think it's a really important component. In terms of reporting, just here is a note to our website. We have already completed 2 of the 3 reports. We had to submit a work plan in August, and we have submitted that. In addition, we had an interim report that we completed in December, and I'll talk about just quickly a few of the findings from there, and then we have a final report in July, which is going to provide recommendations. To talk a little bit about who we're working with, we did hire an external consultant to help us with this, who has experience doing this in other states, and appreciate April Keyes, Tyler, and Jess's participation in this. Actually, Tyler and April were part of the review committee to select the contractor, along with the House Appropriations staff, DPB staff. So we're really thinking about the collaborative approach from a budget decision-making that we can engage all the stakeholders that are involved with this. So we also are engaging the work groups. So we meet with finance officers about this, provosts, as well as keeping all of our stakeholders and advocacy groups informed. So you may be asked by advocacy groups about these various topics, and we'll be happy to answer questions for them. Last 2 components just to highlight is that the interim report, what we found so far, we've only done a quick scan. The hardest work is yet to come, and we plan to do that after session. What we did initially find is that there are a lot of models out there in other states, and so we're probably not looking at one from one state, but bits and pieces from various states that we can learn from, and also what Virginia is doing and how we can build on that. There's things like the Tech Talent Investment Program that looks at that. We also have some other models that we could build off of that are already there and build from, so we can just look at mix and matching with that. In addition, some initial data that looked at comparative institutions in other states, that Virginia's education or operating costs are within line of what is with our institutions as well. So that was a little bit reassuring. We still have to dig in a little bit by institution, so there's more to come there. But I will note in Virginia, we do often fund the costs a little bit more through tuition and fees compared to some of the other institutions versus through general fund. So there's some differences there. And last in the report, we did really start to agree on some core principles and parameters. We felt those were important to get to before we get into the hard part of trying to make decisions. Last, we have what we're doing next. So we do have a survey that's out to institutions to look at this efficiency and effectiveness. We are working on a preliminary model internally. And then once session completes, because we are waiting for the administration staff to be in place, we're working closely with what we sometimes call the members of the Op 6, which are the Money Committee staff, the head of DPB, as well as the head of the Secretary of Finance and Secretary of Education and SHEV. So we really need to engage them once session is complete. But, there's some components that we already plan to have in the model. And the last thing I want to note is, we are going to be working with staff, both on House and Senate, to perhaps include some budget language to look at next steps. We'll have a report in July that's going to complete, but we'd like to make sure this work continues, and we'd like to have an implementation plan. So we're going to be working closely with your staff as well as the House staff to look at something that puts a marker in to say to continue this work, and that we'll still do it. We don't need the budget language, but it's always nice to have to say this is something you all agreed to in terms of parameters, and how can we report that to you? And that would be, draft legislation, recommendations for how to move forward. So we'll look forward to working with you all and your staff on that, and also answer any questions you have. So thank you.
I got a question.
Yes.
What are some of the things other states are doing? You said you're looking at what other states are doing. What are some of the things that they're doing that we're not doing that you think we ought to look at?
There's some things that other states, there's always the talk of outcomes-based funding, and we've heard of that and questions about that.
What funding? What did you say?
Outcomes-based funding, so thinking about, what outcomes do you expect by giving that money? And we do have that, like in the Tech Talent Program, there was some benchmarks set and agreements made with institutions. So that's one thing that we have in specific instances, but not broadly. In addition, we in Virginia, in our old model, don't take into account the types of students that are being served. So we need to think about ways that some states are recognizing that a first-generation student may need more support services and wraparound services, and that may come at a higher cost than an individual. We actually have a former president of ODU on our council, and he said, it's very different to try to help a student that is first generation, doesn't know how to navigate the classes, to just get through the 12 classes, than a student that has parents that know the system and can take 18 and doesn't need any help and they can figure out tutoring on their own. It's a very different type of services that you need to provide based on those types of students. And right now we don't really take that into account. I mean, we don't really have a current model that we're using, but this is something that we want to consider. Is the variation in cost. We do some variation in cost based on the type of program, recognizing that, for example, a health profession program is more expensive than maybe an agriculture program. And I'm using that as an example, but not again on the students. So those are two main things that come to mind.
Madam Chair, I have another question. I notice the average debt for those students that have debt is $30,500 some dollars. That's higher than just a few years ago, isn't it?
Yeah, it's gone up a little bit, and but we've seen a little more leveling off in the more recent years. But it's something we have as part of the measures in our Pathways Opportunity Plan to be looking at and considering debt. Actually, we do have some presentations in the next few weeks that we'll be coming back to you on and talking a little bit about the types of students and where this debt may be occurring. And this is where we've been trying to push more for financial aid and have a big recommendation in this area to try to help reduce that unmet need for students so they aren't taking loans.
And in fact, it's higher in Virginia, according to this, than the national average, which is a little less than $1,000 more than the average, according to this.
Right. And there may be some more nuance to it, but one initial thought is that in Virginia, our tuition and fees tend to be higher, and so there may be a little bit more debt that's being taken on by those students just by how we fund higher ed. But again, Virginia has also looked to provide more aid to counter the higher tuition and fees.
I notice again, Madam Chair, according to this, the state spending per student is $6,500. In North Carolina, it's $10,700 some dollars. They're way ahead of us, and they've historically been that way, right? Because they have in their constitution that public education at the higher education level should be as free as practicable. We don't have that in our constitution at all. So they have a tradition of funding their higher education system more than we have, right?
That's very true. I think they provide more funding, and what we look at is, I believe, and I haven't looked at the numbers, in North Carolina, our total costs, our total spending, when you combine tuition and fees and state funding, is about the same, but the way we fund it is In North Carolina, it's a little more from the state. In Virginia, it's a little more from tuition and fees.
Yeah, I see that.
Senator Edwards.
Madam Chair, the current cost for in-state students, 50% state, 50% the student and their families right now. But yet the goal is, and has been historically, 67% from the state and the rest from the students. When's the last time we ever met the goal? Do you have any idea?
Oh, I had it. I think it's been 15, 20, 2000, 20 years. 20 years. It's been quite some time.
20 years ago? And about time, since the money's coming in now, we ought to do something about that. Yes.
I think it would be helpful. And there is a significant investment from this year. And of course, you've heard from the president in terms of some of their additional funding areas that would help as well.
Okay.
Senator Howell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When you are talking about your study and looking into outcomes, whenever I hear something like that, I cringe because I find, in general, the humanities are downvalued. And in my opinion, that's one of the most important areas of exploration for college students. So I would like some reassurance that that's not going to happen in this, or if it is, some guidance in how to counter it.
Certainly, Senator. I think when we've talked about outcomes, they can look in very different forms. Some of it may be how well they're serving students and having them complete and not focus on a specific degree or program. There's a lot of ways you can look at it. I think what we've seen in other states, they're often much on at a different level in terms of not necessarily the types of degree programs, but moving towards completion if an institution has a different completion rate. But again, those are things that we're still in the very early phases of exploring, and this is where, to your point, there's a lot of people who have strong interests in certain areas, and this is where that March through June timeframe will be very important to get as much input as possible in thinking about how we construct this so it meets as many needs as possible. I know we won't be able to meet everyone's needs, but to take everything into account.
Additional questions? For your efficiency and effectiveness survey, to whom is this going?
This has gone to all of our public institutions and actually that survey is out to that. And we're looking at a variety of areas, both in the academic and administrative areas, ideally to learn a little bit and be able to share best practices as well.
Other questions? Okay, thank you, Wendy.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. All right, so Madam Chair, some of this you will have seen this morning during the presentation from the broader committee meeting. So I'll try and skip over some of those things, or at least move a little more quickly. But today's presentation should go into a little bit more detail about the individual items that we see in the introduced budget. So just as a quick review, we're seeing a net increase of $329.8 million in 23 and $299.4 million in... It is. I just talk really quietly. I'm sorry. I'll speak up. I apologize. So for FY24, we have $436.8 million in increases. So just another, again, quick review, $209.3 million in financial aid opportunities, $194 million to restore and expand affordable access, $55 million to support HBCUs, $39.7 million for cancer research, and $38 million being added for the G3 Workforce Innovation Grants. Now that's separate from the G3 funding that's going directly to students. And again, this is just a breakout of what the financial aid looks like. Just as a little more of a breakdown for the tuition assistant grant increases, The proposal is to go up to $4,500 per year in year one for undergraduates and up to $5,000 per student in year two. For graduate students, it would go up to $2,450 in year one and up to $2,700 in year two. And then for students who are enrolled online only, it would be $2,000 a year. Are there any questions so far? I don't want to keep anyone from asking questions. Okay, so then looking at the immediate breakdown of amendments or introduced items, excuse me, for HBCUs. This is a look at Norfolk State. And again, we talked about the VCAN expansion this morning, but a closer look at some of these items that are included. Again, I had mentioned that a lot of them are directed toward student advisory and wraparound services, but programs like, for instance, Focus on the Total Spartan are directed specifically toward mental health. The Bridge and Beyond program, for example, with $1.3 million in each year, is directed toward first-year students to sort of try and help with the reintegration process in sort of the, I guess we would call it the post-pandemic period that we're now in. There's also funding for curriculum development, the academic advising model expansion, that's adding an additional FTE to review academic advising on campus. The student experiential and research learning, that's adding 7 FTEs so that they can expand programming for pre-professional law and medicine programs and add additional mentoring for those students. Now, similarly, at Virginia State, we see programming under new and expanded academic success initiatives. That's just a variety of advisory programs and mentoring programs for students. The Degree Completion and Career Enhancement Initiative is adding 9 FTEs to also assist with advising. We see the introduction of the new Advanced Manufacturing Logistics Institute. Now, that's adding 9 FTEs, but it's based on existing programming, and it's expanding that into a new initiative altogether. The Pipeline with Purpose program is meant to target high school students and have them enrolling in college-level courses so that they can get up to 24 credits by the time they start college. So, and then moving on to the VCAN expansion for Hampton University and for Virginia Union University. Again, just quick review. This is going back to the original VCAN model. So it would serve all Pell eligible students who are accepted at these 2 schools who live within a 25-mile radius of campus. That's $5 million a year per school. So in terms of some of the other multi-institutional amendments, again, we've got the workforce innovation grants. Those would be applicable to the community colleges with G3 programming. We talked a little bit this morning about expanded and affordable access, the enhanced operations and maintenance funding, minimum wage increase. Just as a reminder, January 1st, that went up to $11 an hour. And then we broke down the cancer research funding this morning. Now moving on page 9 to the individual institutions. Christopher Newport is receiving $500,000 in the first year and $600,000 in the second year for its Community Captains Program. This is an outreach program to high school students in the Newport News area, and that's trying to get more students engaged in the college experience and the admissions process earlier on. They were looking for funding for financial aid to help support those students if they come on board. And it's also putting funding toward their DEI office on campus. For William and Mary, there's $2.5 million in the first year to support the relocation of the Bray School. This was a school that was, it served both free and enslaved youth in the colonial Williamsburg area. I believe it started in the 1760s. You can correct me if I'm wrong. Thank you. I wanted to make sure I hadn't forgotten. But this is to relocate the school to its original site, and it also includes operating funds to begin staffing 2 research teams of 3 researchers apiece. This would be in collaboration with the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. For VIMS, they've requested $400,000 in the first and second year for a postdoctoral research program for underrepresented minorities. I believe they said that nationwide, the number of postdocs in marine sciences for people of color is 6. So they are hoping to add 5 FTEs to start fellowships to increase those numbers. VIMS also has a total of $1.3 million in the first year and $1 million in the second year to support various research initiatives. This includes developing the American Shad Rescue Plan for the James River. There is the Virginia Coastal Resiliency Master Plan, in which they'd be collaborating with other state agencies. And then there's funding for shellfish aquatic management. For Richard Bland, they've requested 6, but received funding for 3 additional FTEs. This is focusing on just making sure that they have duties separated between different roles, and so this helps address those issues. For James Madison, they have $1.9 million in the first year and $2.2 million in the second for their Grow Your Own Teacher program. This would be focusing on it's adding a total of 100 teachers per year, and if I'm remembering correctly, 75 within this group would be teachers or teaching assistants or other professionals who are already in the classroom but would like to get teaching credentials, so that they would be participating for the first 2 years with their local community college, and in the second 2 years taking courses through JMU but online. The remaining 25 seats would be filled by first-time students, and they would spend all 4 years on campus at JMU. They would also are also receiving $150,000 each year to establish the Center for Youth Justice, and that coincides with the introduction of a juvenile justice-related degree that they will begin offering next year. Longwood has its own teacher recruitment and preparation program. It's the Call Me Mister program. It's specifically looking for men, but men from underrepresented populations, to recruit them to become public school teachers. Longwood is also receiving 2 FTEs to support the Moton Museum and the Longwood Center for Visual Arts. ODU is receiving $3 million in each year for their Maritime Engineering and Workforce Training Center. They were originally approached by the U.S. Navy to start this programming. This would be looking at mission engineering, which is a whole different branch of the engineering field. I can get more details for folks, but engineering, honestly, is a little over my head. So ODU is also receiving $250,000 each year to support 4 fellows for the Virginia Symphony Minority Fellowship Program. Funding had previously been in the budget in 2020 as adopted by the General Assembly, but then was unallotted for this. So this is just representing a restoration of that. The University of Mary Washington has 1 FTE to support the work that they're doing with the 2 Commonwealth museums that are managed by their staff. They're also receiving $500,000 each year for disability services enhancement, both for students and for faculty, as they serve a higher proportion of students with disabilities in Virginia. For UVA, on page 10, we see $800,000 in the first year and $1.6 million in the second year to help stabilize the premium rate for UVA's health plan. Just as a reminder, their health plan is separate from the state healthcare plan. Their argument here is that because the state has had extra cash on hand to be able to stabilize its own premium rates, it is not fair to necessarily fund them comparing in the same way that we have in the past, because they do not likewise have a similar amount of cash on hand. Are there any questions?
About any of this or?
Well, Madam Chair.
No, I'm just listening. I'm later on. Okay, I'm a quick step.
Okay.
This is like an invitation.
Okay, thank you.
They get used to me. Just tell me to be quiet till you get there.
All right, moving on to UVA Wise. We see an investment of $11.6 million over the biennium for rural economic development and also program expansion. This involves the addition of 51 FTEs. They would be adding an applied data analytics program as well as a hospitality and tourism management program. But this also includes the establishment and expansion of child care services on campus. This would not only be to provide child care, but also to increase the school's child development degree programming. For the Virginia Commonwealth has $100,000 or $110,000, excuse me, each year to support its partnership with the Virginia Repertory Theater here in Richmond. The Virginia Community Colleges have $4 million in the first year and $4.5 million in the second to expand the Network to Work program. This is a workforce development program that's been offered on multiple sites, largely along the I-64 corridor. This has a 75% completion rate. Their goal is to serve 4,500 participants annually with this funding increase. The community colleges also have $4 million in the first year and $1 million in the second year to support cybersecurity infrastructure enhancement. They have $2.5 million each year for the Hampton Roads Strong initiative. This is to expand programming that's geared around training for jobs that would be directly relevant to expansions with the U.S. Navy, but also with the construction of the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel. We have $1 million in the second year to support the merger between Radford University Carilion and Virginia Western Community College. This is specifically for their occupational therapy assistant program. Previously, we had put money in for their general therapy assistant program, so this is separate. For VMI, the number that I included here is a little bit misleading. There's a total of $6.2 million and $5.7 million in the second year to support the recommendations that have been issued for the One Core, One VMI equity audit. However, of that, $2.6 million is from general funds in the first year and $2.4 million in the second year. And so, Senator Norman, I know that you have an amendment addressing that. Maybe a little bit. VMI also has $400,000 in the first year for the replacement of their Army service uniforms for faculty. My understanding is that the uniforms that they've been relying on are no longer in production, and so being able to maintain uniformity across all of their faculty would be challenging as they need to replace uniforms. The ones they've been using are no longer available for purchase. Virginia Tech has $400,000 in the first year and $700,000 in the second year.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm
And
sorry.
it's not a question for you, it's a question for April or someone else. Does the state pay for our law enforcement officers' uniforms? Or do they pay for them themselves?
So I will have to get back to you.
Okay, yeah, do follow up. Thank you.
And my understanding, Madam Chair and Senator Howell, on the uniforms that are funded here is that VMI traditionally issues one uniform per faculty or staff member, and after that, the individual faculty or staff member is responsible for replacing any missing items or for replacing the uniform in whole. Okay.
I have a question.
Yes, sir. Madam.
Do they have to
Chair.
wear a uniform when they're teaching VMI, or can they wear, suit and tie or something like that? Does anybody know?
My understanding is yes.
They have to wear a uniform.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
In Virginia militia, but they have civilian instructors as well, but if they are part of the military, they must.
Must wear. Okay. That's unique, right?
Okay, you and me on the next slide. Mr. Hogan.
Okay, so going back to the item for Virginia Tech, they receive a total of $1.1 million over the biennium to receive funding parity per student with VMI for their unique military activities program. The Virginia Tech Extension receives $1.3 million in the first year to update their research equipment. They also receive $700,000, in the first year and $1.3 million in the second year to bring the salaries for their extension agents up to market rate. They've been having trouble meeting the competitive rates for those positions and are trying to keep them filled. So the subtotal for all colleges and universities, including the funding for HBCUs that we mentioned earlier, is $65.7 million in the first year and $61.3 million in the second. And then on slide 11, just to do a summary of the proposed amendments for other institutions, we see $1.6 million in each year for EVMS supporting recommendations that were received from SHEV. We also see $500,000 in the first year and $900,000 in the second year for student financial assistance. EVMS doesn't participate in tuition assistant grants, and so this is effectively substituting the funding that would be received there for students who are eligible. The New College Institute receives $3.8 million in the first year and $3 million in the second year to support their rural broadband workforce development program. Effectively for this, they're looking at focusing on 4 areas: wind energy, 5G, broadband, and advanced manufacturing. And so they're trying to expand training opportunities to quickly get more staffers on the ground who have the training and certification to be able to fill those needs, especially as more funding has come in for rural broadband expansion. My understanding is that of the $3.8 million in the first year, $2 million of that is getting ready to set up the programming. They need a lot more lab space to be able to do the in-person components of this training. But in the second year, $1 million of that would be for licensing. In order to get this off the ground faster, they'd be relying on licensing pre-existing curricula rather than developing their own. Let's see. So for IALR, we have state operating support increasing by $800,000 in the first year and $800,000 in the second year. This is to add an executive leadership position and also to add an economic development position. Okay. Next, we have for the Roanoke Higher Education Authority, the on-site lab coordinator and part-time assistant for the Medical Imaging Training Center. They're partnering with VCU to offer that training, but they need on-site staff to be able to support that distance learning. They're also seeing $100,000 in each year to bring the safety and security coordinator position in-house rather than contracting out. Let's see. The Southern Virginia Higher Education Center has $600,000 in the first year and $300,000 in the second year to offer for the Career Tech Academy. It's offering programming to 11th and 12th graders, partnering with 2 community colleges in the area and then 3 public school districts in the area. This has been going on since 2018, and this is to expand programming. They're also receiving $100,000 in the first year for routers and tooling tied to the Product Works equipment programming. For the Southwestern Virginia Higher Education Authority, they're receiving $500,000 in each year to expand the Rural IT Apprenticeship Grant. And then finally, they too are bringing their security services in-house with $200,000 per year. Finally, on slide 12, just to go over some of the operational and programmatic amendments, for the State Council for Higher Education. We see $1 million in the first year and $1.3 million in the second to increase collections for the Virtual Library of Virginia. We see $2.3 million over the biennium to increase FAFSA completion, and that's adding an FTE. And we did go over some of this morning, so that if you'd prefer, we can go ahead and answer questions.
Are there any questions? No. Senator Norman.
I see the ever-present Mr. Blake in the audience, and he knows that I have a bone that I consistently chew on. And How many new degree programs are embedded in this budget?
I will get back to you with the answer for that.
I will accept that answer.
Thank you very much.
And I will say, as I do every year, I think that greater exercise of authority needs to be exercised over higher education in the establishment of new degree programs. Every public college and university in Virginia does not have to be everything to every student. So I look forward to your answer.
That's how they get every dollar.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Madam Chairman.
Oh, my God. Crack me up.
That was it. Senator Ruff.
Okay, thank you. On slide 6, at Virginia State, the new pipeline purpose program, how does that relate to what the community college is doing?
Sorry, going back to slide 6. The Pipeline with Purpose program is specifically for high school students and getting them involved in the college's activities. It's allowing them to take courses for dual enrollment up to 24 credits by the time they start college.
So again, how does that compare with what the community college is doing?
I think this is with the goal in mind of having students enroll at the college upon completion of high school.
So it might be duplicating a little bit.
There are some programs with the community college, but we can happily follow up with you with whether it's specific programs, whether there's overlap between them. My guess would be perhaps there is. So we certainly can follow up with the Virginia State and community colleges.
I thought you were asking about all those new.
Is this to specifically have the students enroll at Virginia State?
That is my understanding, Madam Chair.
Is that it, Senator Ruff?
I think so. I wasn't saying it was a bad idea, but it doesn't lock them into going to Virginia State. They can get the college degrees, and then they can go wherever they want to go when they apply for college.
Other questions? Not, thank you, Jessica.
Okay, thank you.
And I think that completes our agenda for this afternoon. And we'll see you here next Tuesday afternoon at 3:30, Senator Norman.
I have all of my meetings out of the way that are conflicting now. It has been a tough day. I appreciate it, and I deserve to be admonished. But I know that.
Thank you all for coming this afternoon.